Evening and welcome to Suffering in Silence with Pastor Tia here on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. Love Bay family, we're continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Our topic on tonight, we are talking about children being used as weapons in domestic violence. We have with us our co-host for this evening, Pastor Tracy Mariner of Anchored Rock Ministries, and our guest is Judge Jennifer DePillo. She's been with us before, but now she's a judge coming back to sit with us again. So, Tracy, if you would go first and greet our listeners and viewers on this night.
Yes. Good evening, all. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for welcoming us into your space. We hope that we say something and that will encourage, uplift you, and let you know that you're not alone and that you have a community here with you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And again, Pastor Tracy, if anyone would like to participate in services at Anchored Rock Ministries, can you share that information?
Sure. We meet the second and fourth Sundays of each month via Facebook. Um, and then we have Wednesday night Bible study at 7:30 every week. And it's via Zoom, but we also go live on Facebook. And that's at Anchor Rock Ministries um, on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And now
Absolutely.
we will turn the floor over to the Honorable Judge Jennifer DePillo so she can introduce herself. Well, not introduce, so she can say hello to Love Bay again. So, Judge DePillo.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having me back. I hope that I can share some insights that'll be helpful for everybody that's listening.
Thank you so much. So we want to share a few resources and then we will go right into our topic on this evening. First, I want to share that as usual, we are continuing to raise funds for our nonprofit Rise Out of the Ashes Inc. You can purchase my book if you like, Suffering in Silence on Amazon. We use proceeds from my book to help with transitional resources. We help with immediate emergency funding for victims and survivors of domestic violence. We've paid for some individuals to get those things that they need in emergency situations, food and clothing, medical supplies. We've helped with utilities, rent, and mortgage. We've helped a couple ladies continue on with their education. That was something that they wanted to do that was important to them. So if you would like to financially support us, you can visit a GoFundMe and look for our nonprofit, which again is Rise Out of the Ashes Inc. Or you can make out a check to Rise Out of the Ashes Inc. and send that to PO Box 15. We are in Drexel Hill, and our zip is 19026, Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania. I want to share the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services National Helpline. This is in the United States. Their number is 800-662-4357. Befrienders volunteer action to prevent suicide. To find a helpline by your country, you can visit their website, befrienders.org. And then I want to share in the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Their website is thehotline.org. Their number is 800-799-7233. In Canada, we want to share the Canadian Women's Foundation. Their website is canadianwomen.org. Their number is 866-293-4483. And in the UK, we have the National Domestic Abuse Helpline. Their website is nationaldahelpline.org.uk. Their number is 0808-20-00247. And also in the UK, you can visit Women's Aid, AID. Their website is womensaid.org.uk. And with that, Love Bay, we move into our topic on this evening, which is children being used as weapons in domestic violence. And I wanted to approach this evening differently. I didn't want to throw out statistics and numbers because when you're talking about your children, you don't want to hear percentages, and this is just it's just so heartfelt and so hard. So I really, Judge DePillo, if you could, in your expertise, in your experience, what you know, if you could just shed some light. I would like to start with sharing a story, and I think I'll turn it over to you. But not too long ago, I was contacted by a young woman. She just given birth to a baby. Maybe the infant was about 2 months old. She left the house briefly for an appointment, left the house with the baby, with the father of her child. When she came back, the police were in a house waiting for her, escorted her away from the home because they were not married. Her partner had called the police, told them whatever he told them, and got an immediate emergency injuncture to take custody of the child immediately. And he didn't allow her back into his home. It was his home. It was an abusive relationship. And when she called me, I wanted very, very much to help her as much as possible. But all she wanted was to get her child back. And literally in that moment, she was in her car. She did not have a place to go. We contacted her church. Her church was not financially helping. We contacted different areas, emergency shelters around were filled. And so I was trying to explain to her, we got to take care of you right now. We got to make sure that you have a place for you right now. I know that you want your child with you. I know that he doesn't want the baby because he's loving and he just wants his child. He's doing this to harm you. I can see that. But at the same time, I had to tell her, even if you could get an emergency hearing right now and walk into a courtroom, no judge is going to say you can have your child because you don't have a place to live. And I know that it was wrong. I know that it was hateful. I know that it was abuse. But those are stories, that are happening right now, that we don't have immediate answers to. There are women and men who are being told you can only see your child this date, this time, because of what their partner did or said. So again, I wanted to start to give that emphasis to what this problem is, and then Judge DePillo, if you could just take it from here.
Yeah, I mean, that reminded me of a client that I had a number of years ago. She was living with the father of her child, who was, I think, 3 years old at the time. Father asked mother to move out, and she didn't want to willingly move out because she had nowhere to go. So father went and filed a protection from abuse petition and got mother kicked out of the house, and stated that she was on drugs, so she couldn't see the child. We ended up, and you're exactly right about how, as mothers, we want to make sure that our children aren't put in harm's way. And that's like an innate thing that happens. And unfortunately, as a lawyer, I have had to explain to clients that we have to take care of you first, and then we're going to do that next step. And it's very difficult for any mother to say, like, okay, I'm not going to worry about my child. It's obvious that they're worried, but it's definitely a multi-step process. So for this particular client, she was using drugs. She was using marijuana, which the father was supplying for her. So he knew that she was using these drugs, and it wasn't a problem up until he didn't want her in the house anymore.
Right.
So we had multiple court dates, and she wasn't doing really well. So I had to keep telling her, you have to focus on yourself. You have to get yourself straight. You have to make sure that you have all the basic needs that you need for your child first before we go in and fight this fight, because it's not gonna work out well. We ended up having a custody hearing, and she did lose custody of the child and had to get drug tested multiple, it was like once a week for 6 or 8 weeks, to make sure that she was clean. And I had to sit down and tell her, like, personally, I don't have a problem with marijuana, but I wasn't the judge. The judge did have a huge problem with marijuana. So I said to her, you need to take care of your mental health because you're using marijuana every day because you're self-medicating for something that's going on, anxiety, stress, whatever it happens to be. So, I encouraged her to go to a doctor and get prescribed something that the judge wouldn't frown upon because and a lot of people think if I'm on medication for depression or for ADD, or that the judge is going to think poorly of me. And that
Mhm.
there's nothing further from the truth because it actually shows that you're caring for yourself and you're doing everything you need to do to be the best person for yourself and to care for your child or children. So I always encourage people, that is the thing that you need to really be focusing on is you. Eventually, she did get her child back. I mean, she didn't have him full time, but she did have a lot of issues going on, but she did get to see him regularly, and was able to be reunited with him after not having seen him for a period of time. But that's a perfect example. And then I also saw that same father in PFA court multiple times after that with different women. So clearly this was his MO. If he
Mhm.
wanted somebody moved out of his house, this is what he did. He went and he filed a protection order. We often see, I actually had one as a judge where I got a call for an emergency PFA. So it was a gentleman, and I was talking to him and asking him like, what's going on? And he was alleging that his ex-girlfriend's brother was threatening him, and he had all of these messages that he was being threatened. And I said, well, you really need to talk to the police about that because that I could grant your emergency PFA, but that's only going to stay in effect for a couple days. And you have to make sure that this person is servable. And meaning in Pennsylvania, the police have to be able to go and physically hand the papers to this person. So I said, do you know where he's living or where he's at? And he said, no, I mean, he's in Philly somewhere. And I said, well, here's another problem. If I grant it, it's not actually going to be in effect until that process happens, which likely isn't going to happen tonight and tomorrow. This was like, Friday night or Saturday. So I encouraged him to talk to the police about maybe filing harassment charges or something because he had proof. And then it turns out, as we're talking, that his ex-girlfriend had filed a PFA against him previously, and the children were on it. And this is sort of where this all stemmed from and why he wanted to file for one. And then I was like, yeah, I don't think this is a great idea. You need to talk to the police and see what they're going to do. Filing a PFA against your ex when she wasn't the person that threatened you isn't really going to get you what you need. And so I think he was trying to use the process to get some kind of a leg up or get the kids back, when that's not how it works. And unfortunately, if you are the victim of someone that gets a protection order and has your children solely, has custody of them solely under that order, you do have to wait for the process. There's not any emergency that's going to happen quicker, emergency hearing. So in Delaware County, if somebody files, typically the first hearing date is within a week. But typically that first hearing date gets continued because it's so quick that people don't have the opportunity to get an attorney if they want an attorney, to find out what information they need to find out to be able to either defend or, put their case on. So there's usually another space and time that happens, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes it's 30 days. So it's very nerve-wracking for the parent that doesn't have custody of the child, but it is trusting in the process. And I would encourage people to make sure that they find somebody that knows that process and can explain it thoroughly to them, hopefully an attorney, but even some kind of a court advocate that would be able to explain the process so they know what they're getting themselves into. As we were talking about before we went on the air, even if you're not a victim of anything, it's very traumatic to come into a court setting and not know what to expect. As a new judge, I try to explain to the people that are in my courtroom what's going to happen. Today's traffic, this is what we're going to do, so that it sort of takes the temperature down a bit and relaxes everybody. So for me, explaining and having people understand what's happening helps to allay some of that fear and stress and underlying nervousness that can happen. So definitely having an advocate or an attorney on your side is going to help the process go quicker.
Yeah. I know for me, in my case, and then Tracy, I'll go to you for any questions or comments for Judge
Mhm.
DePillo. But when I left my ex-husband, my youngest child was a year old. Um, and I've had to explain this to a few women that when you have a child, whether you're married or not to your partner, neither of you actually has custody of that child.
Mhm.
And so when I left, she was a year old. And, I've shared before, Love Bay, I went through several processes at different time. I filed for divorce. I filed for child support. I filed for custody of my youngest child. My teenagers, they were teenagers. But my baby, I was concerned about, one day her going for a visit and not coming home. So
Mhm.
for me in my mind, like I'm going to avoid that. So I filed the paperwork first to get
Mhm.
custody of her. Now I also knew he didn't want custody of the baby. I knew that. So
Mhm.
I knew I had to do this now because if I had waited until she gotten older where she could take care of herself, move around, didn't have to be watched after, that was
Mhm.
going to present a bigger problem to me. I could, one day go pick her up and he not give her back. So I wanted to avoid all of that. But just the pillow, and then Tracy, I'll go to you. I've had to explain, and if you could elaborate on it, whether you're married or not, to your partner, when a child is born, neither of you actually have custody of that child, and nobody's thinking, especially if you're married, I would say, we're having a
Mhm.
baby. One day I'm going to have to go to court and get custody of my child. Nope, that's not a thought that you have when you're believing
Right.
that you're in a loving relationship. When you're believing we're having a child and we're going to be together and grow together. Nobody's thinking in the back of my mind, well, let me have this plan to go to court, and fill out these papers and get custody of my child. So, Judge DePillo, if you could maybe even explain it in a better way that I can, you literally
Yeah.
don't have custody of your child when your child is born to you.
Mhm.
So when I would explain to clients, when you come in to talk to me about custody, when there's not a controversy, there's not a problem, it's not an issue. Um, there's an assumption, my husband and I are together, our kids are in school, we're both on the list for everything. There's, anybody can pick the child up. It's all good. Um,
Mhm.
it's when there's a dispute or there's a separation, and a lot of schools will ask now, like, do you have a custody agreement? Like they want copies of that so they know legally who they're allowed to release the child, or children to. So yeah, I mean, once there's a dispute, you do have to go file for custody. Otherwise, you're going to have that issue. And I unfortunately had a case last year where a woman came to me. She had already been navigating the custody system by herself. Her ex-boyfriend, they had a child together who was 5. They were sort of just, they weren't together anymore, but she was allowing him time with the child, but it was starting to become um, just whenever he wanted to come. And she would explain to me that he'd come like at 11 o'clock at night to come pick the child up. And she was just sort of tired of this not having a good routine.
Mhm.
So she decided to file for custody on her own, which she did. And the case was sort of moving through the system as it does. It doesn't happen overnight. It can take a year or more for it to go through the entire process. So if there's no agreements, there's the dog, sorry. If there's no agreements, then you're going to go through the process and it's going to take a while for you to get where you need to go with the judge. So they got to a point where they were before a judge. They had like a pre-trial conference, which is like the step before you have your trial. So they were almost there. And then he decided he was going to take the child for custody. This was like in August, and
Mhm.
he never returned her.
Mm.
So she was freaking out, didn't know what to do. She was still navigating the system on her own. And I think she filed an emergency custody petition with the court saying that, she hasn't seen the child. He took the child in August. This is now like October. What he did was So she and the child had always resided in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. We're right on the border of the state of Delaware, and that's where he
Mhm.
lived. So he didn't like what was happening in Delaware County. So he
Mhm.
decided when he took the child, he filed a brand new case in the state of Delaware, and alleged that, mom was a terrible person and got full custody of the child in Delaware. So he had a valid order that said that he had full physical and legal custody of this child. He registered her for school, so she's now going to kindergarten. He's doing all the things that you would tell somebody to do to establish that custody, except he did it wrong. Um, so you can't file a brand new case in another jurisdiction. You have to claim that the first jurisdiction isn't appropriate and have the case moved. So when I finally got involved, I filed my own petitions in Delaware County, sort of alleging that he did all these things. They were all denied. I had to find an attorney in the state of Delaware because I am not licensed in the state of Delaware, that was kind enough to take the case for free, and went into court in Delaware and explained the same thing that I was explaining to the court in Delaware County, and saying, look, there was already this case he had appeared for court multiple times. So if he didn't approve of the jurisdiction in Delaware County, he needed to raise that at some point, and he hadn't, and he had come all these different times. So the state of Delaware finally threw out the case, dismissed it, and threw it out. He kept going back. He went back multiple times to the state of Delaware trying to refile. They kept kicking it out. And the order that the judge signed was telling him that he can't ever file there again for custody. He's not allowed. So they weren't going to accept any more custody petitions from him. And then went back to the court in Delaware County, and he went through a few attorneys and was trying all this sort of backhanded stuff. And in the end, when the custody trial date came, he alleged that he had the flu. He had already gotten a bunch of continuances, and ended up, my client got her child back. And it took a long time. It was over a year. And it's sad, but it's one of the things that I would always say to clients, like, my mom hat, it's, devastating. My lawyer hat, this is the way it is. Like, there's not any faster way to do it, unfortunately. I mean, I wish there was, and I felt terrible for her. But in the end, it just took a lot of time for us to work the process. It was just one step at a time. It was that, we had to just chip away at everything and do everything in the right order to make sure that she got her child back.
Thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, I have a question. Like, when it comes to males that are in a domestically abusive relationship, and they're trying to gain custody of their children, and have you found that it's harder for them, or is it easier? Because I'm just thinking of a situation where I know that this is going on. Mother's been addicted to substances, has to take care of them for a year. He's still paying child support for these children that are in his care. But now it's like she's the abuser in the relationship, and definitely uses the children as weapons, to where he can't see them right now, and he's trying to build a case to show that she's capable of, caring for their children. For him as a male, what advice would you give to him? Like, what, I know that it shouldn't be different, but it's been a struggle for him to try to get the custody of his 4 children. Um, what kind of advice would you help for a male in a domestic relationship trying to gain custody of their children?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like it is a little bit harder. I will say, 20 years ago when I started, it almost universally, mom got custody of the kids and dad got visitation. And then as time went on, like, the pendulum swung, and it became, a little bit more, we're now in this realm of 50-50 custody, which I'm not a huge fan of, but because in my opinion, it's not great for the children to be moved
Right.
constantly from household to household and have different, rules and regulations, and things going on. It's just not, the stability isn't there that we know that kids need. So in my opinion, I don't love it, but we've moved to this 50-50 kind of thing. So a lot of courts, and this is where it comes again, having somebody that really understands your system, because all judges are different. They all come with different backgrounds, different opinions, different levels of experience, different court systems, like from Philadelphia to Delaware County, Chester County, Montgomery County. They all work a little differently. We all have our own local rules. So it's really important for somebody to understand all that and know the process, and be able to build a case. So in Pennsylvania, we have 16 factors for child custody. And, the thing that I tell my clients to work on is making sure that you have a stable, environment. You have housing, you have food, you have a job, you have all these things that you need first. And then you can work on, the other factors that are more like on the outside. So it's like getting all of that stuff in a row. And if she doesn't meet those primary factors, that's the important thing to be showing to a court, but also having somebody that's going to be able to advocate for you and know how that works. Because when you have two pro se parties, so people that aren't represented by attorneys, it comes off as a, finger pointing,
Yeah.
it's like, oh no, he's the drug addict. No, she's the drug addict. So if you don't go in with some kind of proof, judges and lawyers love paper, and we love proof, we love pictures, we love all that kind of stuff. So, if you have any of that, it's really important to be able to show it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think at the top of our minds, one of the things, the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about children being used as weapons is custody, because it's like whether you're male or female, we know you don't want to care for this child. We know you just want to hurt your partner or your ex-partner. So I want to take the child from you. I think that's one of the first things we think about. But I want to point out some other areas of how children are used. Definitely, unfortunately, children are abused themselves, physically, mentally, emotionally. But another point, I think some people don't see this as abuse. You can have a situation where one parent, he or she may not want custody, but they use their time to manipulate the child, manipulate the child mentally and emotionally. So many cases. So it's when you're with me, you get to do whatever you want. It's always a yes. It's you can do no wrong. And then when you get back to the custodial parent, it's like you have to deprogram, your child all over again. So it's not always custody. So Jennifer DePillo, Jennifer, I meant to say Judge.
Okay. I still have a first name.
Could you talk about that aspect of it? Sometimes children being used as weapons is the child being manipulated, and of course, the child doesn't know. A child wants what they want, and dad's going to let me do whatever I do because dad loves me. But mom says you need to go to bed at this time, and you need to get up and go to school, and these are the clothes that you are allowed to wear, but dad lets you get away with whatever you want. And then there's resentment planted between the child and mom. So could you talk about that issue?
Yeah. So one of the things that judges typically do is, depending on the child's age, they will talk to the child separately. So one of the things that I've seen very good judges do is sort of say, so what do you do at mom's house? What kind of rules does mom have? What things do you get as a reward if you do something really great? And the same for dad, right? So because if you don't just ask a child, and I will say this to children if we know they're going to talk to a judge, it's not the judge. You're not the decision maker as the child about where you're going to be more time, or however it's going to work out. You're not picking your custodial parent. You're actually explaining to the judge like what both home life like situations look like. And if someone said, who do you want to live with, which the judges don't do that, and the child might say, well, I want to live with dad. Well, why do you want to live with dad? Well, he lets me play Xbox until midnight. That's not really the best parenting skills, right? Like that's, if we're talking about a 12-year-old or something. So good judges will sit and sort of figure that out. And because we've gotten to this 50-50 scenario, which sometimes, depending on the age of the child, sometimes it's 1 week on, 1 week off. Sometimes it's, 3.5 days and 3.5 days. A lot of, and I'm going to say men, because that's sort of where the pendulum swung from, utilize the time. They take the time to have the custody, but they don't really want the custody. They just want to not pay child support. So they definitely interact. So and I think the push for 50-50 came from advocates for men saying like they're paying all this child support because they don't have the custodial time with the kids. So if and that's statutory, you know, about child support. So the more time, the more overnights you have with your child, the less child support you're going to pay. So it's very interconnected. And I do think that you have these men that take these kids but don't really, you know, want to be the parent. They just want the credit. And I hope that's not the mass majority of men out there, but I've seen it happen, you know, and then it's difficult for the mother in that situation that, like you said, that has to do this deprogramming thing when the kids come home and it's, and not only that, but they send the kids home without the stuff they came with. So I used to get that complaint all the time. I bought all these clothes for the child. I send the child with the clothes and the sneakers, and they come home and they're wearing like not what I sent them in. So I would have to say, look, when the dad is supposed to have clothes for the child, so you shouldn't have to send a suitcase full of clothes. You send what the child is wearing that day, and they're supposed to send the child back in what they were wearing that day, hopefully clean. But you know, you sort of have to strategize to make it work. And look, I think back in the day when it was dads had just weekends, you know, for the most part, it was like every other weekend and one night during the week for dinner. I think dads were the fun dad. And it was harder for mom because mom was the person that was the disciplinarian and setting all the rules and being the, you know, so I do think that affected kids too, because they were like, well, mom's no fun. She's the one that's doing all this hard work and, you know, taking care of us all the time. And then here comes dad swooping in and taking them to like, you know, parks and doing fun things because they're trying to get quality time together. So I think it's difficult in both scenarios. And it's hard for the woman, typically, again, the woman to have to deprogram the child when they come home about, you know, without, and we always say as attorneys, like, you don't want to say bad things about dad either, because then you're doing the same thing that they're doing in a different way. So it's definitely difficult, and it's case by case scenario. It really depends on what the situation is. And then putting everything in writing. This is, you know, like I said before, attorneys love paper. So putting everything in writing. So text messages are fine, emails are fine, just any way that you can print it out, saying things like, just a reminder, you know, bedtime is whatever. I'd really like you to keep the child on that specific schedule. And then when you start seeing that it's not happening and maybe there's some adverse effects on the child, that's where you can go back into court and say, look, you know, dad's not following sort of the process that we have here. And that's where you try not to have judges get involved in little things, but it can turn into a bigger thing. And then you have to go back and have a judge make a determination on what that looks like. And it may be a very specific schedule for the child. Like if you have a child that has special needs, there may be very specific things that have to happen timing wise and maybe food choices or whatever. And that might all have to be laid out in a custody order. I tried to make my custody orders very fluid to sort of move with the child as they get older. So you leave them a little more open so that you don't have to go back to court all the time. But sometimes you have difficult situations where you do have to go. And we started a program in Delaware County, and they have it in other counties, surrounding counties too, where we have parent coordinators. So they're specially trained attorneys that take some of those like little things like he's not returning the clothes or he's always late when we're doing the exchanges. You can go to the parent coordinator and have them make sort of a determination on what's going to happen next. And that's been helpful to have to not go back before a judge and have to wait maybe 3 months to even get there.
Okay. All right. So I want to ask you this question, and then Pastor Tracy, I'll go to you for a question or comment. Can you please speak about the difference between the validity of an actual custody agreement or child support agreement and two people, be they married and separated or not married but separated, getting a piece of paper and just writing down their own plan and them signing it saying this is what we're going to do? Can you talk about the difference between coming up with your own plan and signing it and actually having a legal document from the court?
It's more about enforceability, right?
Mhm.
Like you can have your own agreement that you guys sign and everything's great, and then somebody doesn't follow it, and then you have to go to court to get it enforced. And then the debate is going to be whether or not it was enforceable in the first place. Where if you start off in custody court and end up with a court order, and we do sometimes negotiate an agreement at the end, but what we do is we make sure that it's filed with the court. So it's
Mm-hmm.
signed by a judge. So I had this long custody agreement that we did. It was, 3 pages long. We made sure that the judge signed off on it at the end. And I always explain, you can always agree to outside of what's in that paper. So, if the paper says you each get 3.5 days a week, but then, 6 months down the road, it's like, well, I'm going to have 4 days and you're going to have 3 days, and both people are okay with that. You can just start doing that. You don't need to write that down. But if somebody doesn't want to do that anymore, reverts back to that paper. So you're always able to agree outside. You don't necessarily have to write it down. We do recommend that you write it down somewhere so that everybody's on the same page, and you can bring that up in court if you need to. But you don't always need a court order. I mean, I will say that too, because I've had clients that they think it's not going to work out well for them if they have to go to court, either because dad's going to, take that out on them at some point or whatever. There's going to be some adverse reaction to it. It's okay to agree in your own space. Just you can do something in, just even if you go back and forth via email, like, hey, this is what we agreed to. And it's then if you have to go to court, you have that to present, even if it's handwritten, it doesn't matter. But as long as it's like everybody was on the same page, we both were agreeing, you don't even have to sign it. It's just that it went back and forth and you both say, yeah, this looks good. I agree. And this is what we're going to do. That works. I just don't see that happen because usually, if you're agreeing, you're not writing anything down. It's only when you don't agree, that it becomes an issue. And then you start writing things down and having to go to court.
Yeah. Thank you. Pastor Tracy?
Yeah, mine is on a different aspect of if you're in a situation where you're a family member and you're watching this divide, and you're asked to be like a character witness, and in the situation where I know some people where it's like dual violence, like both of them are in this situation, and honestly, seemingly neither one of them are fit. Um, how, like a family member that cares or whatever, I'm trying to be delicate in the way that I say it because I want to just say, well, seemingly, I did say seemingly unfit. How can a family member step in because the children are being used as weapons? Like, well, you might do this, but at least I don't do that. And these kids are suffering because it's an unstable environment on both ends, even though they might have a little more stability over or maybe at dad's or a little more stability over at mom's. There's still no complete stability because both are angry, both are using the situation to manipulate the kids as to why you should feel sorry for me. One of their siblings had passed away unexpectedly. So how do you as a person that is asking to be a character witness that doesn't feel really that either situation is appropriate to lead the kids in, how does a family member or someone step in this case where the kids are being used as weapons and the kids are not being the first and foremost thought in the situation on either side?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately in PA, I would say if anybody felt a child was at risk, you're going to call Childline, which starts a whole process with, Children and Youth Services in Delaware County would investigate the home life and just see what's going on. With that being said, it has to be something really, really serious for children and youth to get involved and like remove the children, let's say.
Mhm.
A lot of times it's not that. Um, it's not it doesn't rise to that level, right? It's like somewhere below. It's like, yeah, the kids are fed, they have clothing, shelter, food. It's just sort of volatile situation at home. That's not necessarily going to get the kids removed from the situation. But if there was already a custody dispute and you were asked to sort of say your opinion. I would say be truthful to the judge. Like, it's unfortunate, even the few cases that I've had so far being a judge, you literally have an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is to try to learn somebody's life. It's not long enough. I really can't
Mhm.
understand the depth and the breadth of everything that's going on. And people generally have a hard time sort of picking. This is why attorneys are so important, picking like the most important stuff to present, because you really have such a limited period of time. So you want to present the stuff that's most important. So telling the truth and presenting the stuff that's like the most dangerous stuff, you want to get out first. You don't want to lead with the least dangerous, because you may not get to the most. So you want to start with the worst possible stuff and let the judge know. We also have in Pennsylvania where grandparents can petition for custody. So if you're a grandparent,
Mhm.
you have that option to do that. And you can intervene as a grandparent in a custody action if the parents have a custody action. So we've seen that a lot. And in Delaware County, we have a lot of support for grandparents that are raising their grandchildren. That happens quite a bit. Typically, it happens when you have one parent that is deceased. I've seen it often where, unfortunately, you have one parent murders the other parent, and then
Mhm.
grandparents get involved.
Mhm.
Or there's a parent that's deceased, and the living parent is addicted to drugs or has some serious, crazy things going on, like homeless or,
Mhm.
um, grandparents can jump in and take the children. There's been plenty of times where I've left court, not necessarily with my clients, but just seeing what's happening and gone, neither of those parents are fit for these kids.
Right.
But as a judge, you don't want to take kids away from their parents
Mhm.
unless it's really absolutely necessary, because our foster care system, I mean, God bless the people that are foster
Mhm.
parents. It's not perfect. And it's not what any judge wants for any kid. I mean, they're going to always try to rehab the parent. So in this situation where a parent is addicted to drugs, they will give that parent every opportunity to get clean and take the time that they need to get back on their feet so that they can reunite. That's always the goal, is to reunite the parents with their children.
Mhm.
Um, and unfortunately, sometimes there's that, it's just below the threshold of
Mhm.
where you're going to get that other intervention.
Mhm.
And it's sad, but there's not a whole lot that you can do as like a bystander unless you were invited into the situation to
Mhm.
testify.
But the if you are invited, what I heard you say was be truthful if you feel that there's situations. That's
Yes.
how you can help the children being used as
Yes.
weapons, is to being truthful about what you've witnessed.
And
Even
planning ahead and saying,
yeah.
like, let me write down all of the things that I have seen that have just like taken my breath away,
Mhm.
and just sort of categorizing and rating them so that when you do have that option to talk to the judge, that you're going to give the worst possible stuff first, get that out there, because your time is so limited. You
Mhm.
want to make sure that you make an impact and that they understand like what's happening.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. So, Judge DePillo, if there is not um, a custody order in place, if there is no action that has been taken through the courts, can a grandparent step in and file, or
Yes.
would the grandparents would their only recourse be to go through child line?
Mm.
No, I mean, now I will say, depending on the severity of it. So if you have a situation where, a child is at major risk, like there's drug use in the home, there's like, you're seeing things like they're taking the children out without car seats, and that, like, that's kind of serious stuff. Like there's drug use, there's there's not food, they're not being fed. That's the kind of stuff where you can absolutely call Childline. They're going to intervene immediately. Emergency custody petitions are also heard on that, on those kinds of things. So the judges only really accept emergency custody petitions if it's like life threatening to the child,
Mhm.
or if a child was kidnapped or, taken and not being returned. Like those are emergency custody petition type things. And there are some regulations with grandparents when they can intervene and when they can't. But anybody can file any kind of case, and then it'll get determined whether or not it's valid,
Mhm.
and be able to move forward. So I would say if you were concerned, you could always make an attempt to file a case and see what happens. And then that might prompt the system to sort of start doing their job,
Mhm.
and maybe, having some interventions for the kids.
Mhm.
A lot of times it's school teachers that end up,
Mhm.
calling Childline because they're seeing
Mhm.
kids come into school maybe with bruising, or, they're hungry all the time and they're, not doing well or falling asleep in class. And so we see that often where, teachers are ending up calling Childline and getting the process started.
Mhm.
Um, and it gets the police involved too if needed. So it's really important, to utilize that step if there's like immediate
Yeah.
need for it. Yeah.
Yes. So I want to make a point, and then Pastor Tracy, I'll go to you. I want to emphasize that we are not advocating for anyone to go to court to file for custody, because
Right.
we know that that may not be the best choice for you. I
Mhm.
want to be very clear. I knew what I was doing.
Mhm.
For me, I knew that was going to work for me. I knew I was not going to get resistance. If you are dealing with domestic violence, if you are dealing with any kind of harm, you have to make the best choice for you and for your children. So that might be that you do not walk into a court and file for custody. It might be that you don't go and file for child support, because filing for child support means you're not just going to get a check, you're going to get some kind of interaction from that person. So for some people, it's best for me to financially take care of myself and my children on my own, as opposed to what this other person will bring into my life. So
Mhm.
do what is best for you.
Mhm.
I always say, but be aware. Just know and understand. Understand what that paperwork says
Yeah.
when you're filing for custody. You need to know what you're doing, know what you agree to, if that's the road that you take.
Mhm.
But I don't want anyone to walk away from this evening feeling like I have to go to court.
Right.
No, not if that's not in your best interest. Not if that's going to harm you or your child, because we
Yeah,
know.
and if I could add that is one of the first things I assess when I had somebody come and talk to me about custody. It's like, well, why do you want to file for custody? Well, I think I have to because we're not together. I go, okay, well, tell me what's going on. Like, have you seen him? Have you heard from him? No. I said, well, you as soon as you file, you're going to have to serve him with the papers and you're going
Mhm.
to have to see him. So what do you think's going to happen when you do that? Well, I think he's going to be mad, or if I file for child support, he's going to be mad and he's going to file for custody because he doesn't want to pay. If he's going to say if I'm paying for the child, I want to see the child, and I see that a lot. So we would go through this whole scenario, and there's been plenty of women that have walked out of my office and said, I'm better leaving a sleeping dog lie. Like if
Mhm.
and I always say, look, you can always file later. If you find that he's now starting to call you and ask to see, and you're not comfortable with that, then call. And sometimes the larger the space and time that has passed when dad
Mhm.
has seen the child, the
Mhm.
better it is for you,
Right.
down the road to retain custody. So I have a client that I've had for 6 or 7 years. Um, the dad hadn't seen the child in a really, really long time. It was like, I don't know, it was like 5 years or 4 years. And so the court ordered, they will order reunification therapy, before they'll order any like physical custody time. And that is based on a therapist recommendation after they meet with the the father and the child and then see them together, how they interact, if they're going to allow, any kind of physical interaction after that. So
Mhm.
I would always say the bigger space and time, the better it is, because you're going to end up with reunification, and then you're going to have a therapist that's going to recommend whether or not it's really good for the child to be with dad moving forward.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Pastor Tracy?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Judge, if someone decides that the right pathway forward is to go and file, how would you recommend them seeking an attorney? Because all attorneys are not created equal. How, like, how would you recommend what attorney to go to? Because I know that can be a little overwhelming. Like, if I make the decision to file and to go ahead and go forth, how do I even narrow it down to someone who's going to, like you said earlier, someone's going to advocate for me and give me all the knowledge that I need to walk through the whole process and not just take my money. So how do you suggest that people select an attorney in these types of situations if they determine
Great
not to?
question. It's a great question. So one of the first things I always recommend is finding an attorney in the jurisdiction in which you're going to file it. So if you're filing in Delaware County, you want a Delaware County attorney. And there's reason for that. I talked a little about it before. Every county in Pennsylvania, and we have like 67, they all have different rules. So we have statewide rules, but then we have local rules. So you want somebody that understands those local rules. You also want somebody that knows the judges that they're going to be going before. You
Mhm.
could easily hire a Philly attorney to come to Delaware County. They'll do it. They're going to charge you more because they have to travel. So that's the one thing to be aware of. And secondly, they may not be super familiar with our Delaware County judges. So, we have 5 judges that sit in family court and they cycle around. So you don't know who you're going to pull. So you
Mhm.
want somebody that's familiar with all of them so they know how to prepare for each and every one of them because they're all very different in how they handle their courtroom, how they handle certain cases, what really, sort of sets them off. So those are the
Mhm.
2 first things. I would also say if you have limited means, research what is available in your county for free legal services. There's typically a domestic violence center. There's typically a victim advocacy center. There's legal aid, which is, you have to be really, you have to be like 150% of poverty level to be able to get a legal aid attorney. But those nonprofit attorneys are going to be people that have been in court all the time, and they're going to be familiar and know the system. The other thing I often recommend is I say, most counties will have a lawyer referral system that runs through their bar association. So Delaware County does have that. It's a small fee. I think it's $15, and that gives you 30 minutes with an attorney. You're interviewing the attorney more than the other way around. It really, you're trying to find somebody that is going to work with you and understand you and your personality. And, when someone asks me for a recommendation personally, I say, well, what are you looking for?
Mhm.
Because attorneys are different. We all have different personalities. You get, some people say, I want somebody that's aggressive. I- You know, I don't know if aggressive is necessarily effective, but if
Mhm.
that's what you want, like, then I can find you somebody that's going to be a pit bull in the courtroom. That's great. You want somebody that's going to be a little softer around the edges and be able to hold your hand. That's a different personality.
Mhm.
So you want somebody that, you want to be interviewing for the style that you're looking for. And I would say you probably want to think about that a little before you meet with your first, the first
Mhm.
possibility. Like,
Mhm.
I want somebody that's going to be super aggressive in court, and the why, because you really might not want somebody that's super aggressive in court. You might
Mhm.
just want what you want, and you might not need a super aggressive person for that.
Mhm.
You want to interview them about how well they know the judges, the system, how it all works. And again, basic, stick in the county that you're in. It's going to save you money in the end. If you're
Mhm.
going for an attorney that you're paying for, you're not going to have to pay for them to travel to the location and possibly sit there. We have, just for example, in Delaware County, our protection from abuse day is Thursdays typically, and
Mhm.
your paperwork will say that you need to be there at 8:30. And I can't tell you how many times I say to clients, you don't need to be there at 8:30. I know the paperwork says that, but you're just going to be sitting there longer. I want you there by 9:15. The judges
Mhm.
typically don't take the bench till 10. That gives us time so that we can sit and talk, and I can figure out if the other party is there, has an attorney, what the situation is. So that saves you time too. And that saves, you money if you have an attorney that knows that they don't have to show up till 9:30 instead of 8:30, because then you're paying for an extra hour that you didn't need to.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well,
Thank you.
well, ladies, thank you so much. We're just under the hour. And I mean, just before we go, I would ask you both to leave us with your final thoughts on tonight. But
Mhm.
I think the last thing that I want to say, if you are in a position you're looking for an attorney, if you're dealing with domestic violence, you need to have an attorney who is familiar with dealing with domestic violence.
Mhm.
Um, because it's just a different animal. It really is. So in your search, you want to go through resources, you want to be smart about it, but definitely if domestic violence is a part of your issue, you want to look for someone who can deal with that, who understands that, who understands when I'm standing in front of you and I'm giving my story and I'm not crying, but I'm not lying to you, or who understands if I'm mumbling and I just can't get it out and I'm afraid to walk into this courtroom. That's part of the issue. Somebody who really understands, who's not just going to take a check from you, but who understands your issue and really wants to help. So that would be the last thing that I would throw out. But ladies, if you would leave us with your final thought on tonight, Judge DePillo, I would ask if you would go first, and I thank you again for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. I would say that is absolutely accurate. You want somebody that is trauma informed. And so you can start with your local domestic violence shelter that might have resources for you. I know our local center will provide you with an advocate who's not an attorney, but somebody that also is there for you. Can sit with you, can talk to you about what's happening. You have like a one-on-one person with you. So that's really important. Knowing that sometimes it takes time. Unfortunately, our legal process is not quick. The protection from abuse may be quick in time and that you can get into court within a week. It's the quickest thing we have legally, but most things are going to take time. And even the protection, it typically isn't done in a week. It does take some time. So just being patient and taking care of yourself, which is the most important thing, and making sure that you have everything checked off, that you're in a good place, that you're taking care of yourself mentally and physically, and knowing that it will come with time. It just takes that time. You need to be patient.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Pastor Tracy, if you would close us out for tonight.
Sure. I would want to echo what has been said, as well as the thing that you said, Pastor Tia, which is do what's comfortable and what's best for you in your situation. Knowing that everybody's situation, domestic violence is the umbrella, but there's so many hits and darts that comes from that. So your situation could be different, and what works for one isn't always going to work for the other. So I would just echo in this last thoughts of doing what's best for you. And if you're a support system for someone that is going through that, what the Judge DePillo said as well is, and you're asked to be a voice for that person, be an honest voice. And just support them, but really know that everybody's journey through this process is different, and don't compare or feel like you have to do something if it doesn't work for you.
Awesome. Ladies, thank you so much. That was a beautiful summation. You sound like a lawyer. Love it. If you want to catch up on previous episodes from our program, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence DV. Please also remember to like, share, and subscribe via whichever platform you're watching us by. We thank you so much for joining Suffering in Silence with Pastor Tia here on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. Love Bay, remember that we are rising out of the ashes together. Good evening.